This is Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Samoch Ches, and we turned over the page yesterday to the top of Samoch Ches and Aleph, in which the Gemara asks that the case is that we are discussing that Kiddushin does not take effect, that in a scenario where Kiddushin does not take effect, the offsprings are mamzerim, and again this will become clear as we remind ourselves as we begin the Gemara again. The Gemara asks, excuse me, afilu nida nami. And as the Tab Rashi points out, that if one is mekadesh panuya, if one marries a single woman, b'mei nidasa, loyla have a kedushin, there should be no kedushin. V'mbol have nidasa, the yevelad mamzer. And of course we know that that's not true. We know that if one, first of all, for sure can marry a nida, and whether Vlad Mamzer or not would be our discussion. So asks the Gemara, Afilu nida nami, Allah ma'amar Abaye, what is the reason that Abaye has taught Akol Maidim, the top line of Samach Chesam and Aleph, everyone admits, so we read yesterday that Amar Chizki, Amar Kra, teaches the Torah Teni Dasa Alav, a special Xeris Akasav that breaks the rules. That what? Afilu Bishas Nidasa, Teba Havaya, there should be a Havaya, there should be a marriage, even though she is a Nida. Asks the Gemara Mechti, says the Gemara, we're just trying to figure out whenever we have something with an Einesh of Kares, what is the status of the Kiddushin, or more particularly, what is the status of the offspring? So says the Gemara, so how do you know? How do you know to equate it to achais isha? Aksha lenida. We should equate it to a case of a nida, which would thereby show us that Kiddushin does yes take effect. Says the Gemara, klal kula chumra lechumra makshin. If we're not sure, by definition, by default, we have to go with the chumra because of the uncertainty that there is, and that's why we're going to learn from achais isha, one's wife's sister. Says the Gemara, another makar, that Kedusha will not take effect in a case where there is an Isser of Achavar Yaakov Amar Asya, B'kal v'chaymer me'yavam, a kal v'chaymer, Oma Yavama she belav, Yavama is only belav yet. Lo tafsi Kedushin. The halacha is that there is no Kedushin, again, lav meaning in that malchus. Chayve misus, chayve krisois. Then what shall the halacha be? Lo kol shekein, that what? Lo yitafsi bam Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, if that is true, shar chayve lavin nami. We should say the same thing that by all other chayve lavin, that what? That the Kiddushin should not take effect. Amar Rav Papa explains, Rav Papa, chayve lavin behed yaksiv behu. But chayve lavin, it says explicitly, kisena le'ishtei nashim. Says the Torah, if one has two wives, and the Torah labels these two wives, achas ahuva v'achas nuah, one is beloved and one is hated. Says the Gemara, what does that mean? What Hashem loves some and Hashem hates others, what does it mean? Rather, what must it be referring to? Ella, we know what ahuva means. Ahuva b'nisueha, snua b'nisueha. It means in the nisuin, in the marriage that there is, it is hated or it is loved. The meaning that Kadosh Baruch Hu likes or dislikes his marriage, meaning there is an aveira. So even though there is an aveira, there's chayve lavin, and yet that there is a marriage, and that's going to be the makar that even in a case of Isser, even in a case of Lav, there's going to be Kiddushin that is Chal. Ask the Gemara, Rav Akiva argues on this whole premise, and he says, indeed, there is no Kiddushin b'chayve lahavin. Says the Gemara, according to Rav Akiva, Kisiyana b'may mukim. What's Rav Akiva going to use with the aforementioned pasuk of Kisiyana le'ishtei nashim? Says the Gemara, Ba'amar l'koyin gadol u'charav simhai. Titani Rav Simai Omer Minakolay Rav Kiva Isa Mamzer. Rav Simai is taught from anything. Rav Kiva creates a mamzer chutz ma'amad l'kohen gadol. Why? Sharia marter lo yisachalel, and therefore from there we learn out chalul ma'isa vein oisa mamzeris. It does not create mamzeris. Since we learn this out from the pasuk that the children are not mamzerin, must be that the Kiddushin does indeed take effect. Continues the Gemara. That is how Rav Simai learns Rav Akiva. Or Rav Yeshevav, and according to Rav Yeshevav, the Amar, ben Akiva ben Yosef taught Rav Yeshevav, get up and scream on Akiva ben Yosef. Shayomer, because he used to say, Kol she'en Nabi Abi Yisrael. Havalad mamzer, the child is a mamzer. So what's the problem? Rav Akiva seems to say the kid's going to be a mamzer. Hani chol Rav Yeshevav. It's good according to Rav Yeshevav. Yilefukim Rav Simai kasi. If it's coming to siege, not like Rav Simai, then Shabir. Then everything is good. Eli time or didn't have Sheikah, saying his own reasoning. Say that the child of a forbidden marriage or forbidden union is a mamzer, even if it's only an Isser Asay. B'mai mukimla. What are you going to do with the pasuk that says Kisiena le'ish shtei nashim? Explains the Gemara, we're going to have to say that a woman who had relations, who's not allowed to marry a kohen gadol, in that case, if she does, Rav Akiva is going to be maskim that there will be Kiddushin and the child is not a mahamzer. Says the Gemara, why? What's the reason to be machalik in these two cases? Explains the Gemara, Mishav Nahavle Asay She'enai Shava Bakol. And the reason is it's a little bit more mekel in the case of a bo'ula. For what reason? Because it's an asay she'enai shava ba'kol. What does that mean? It's not equally applied to everyone. That it's only specifically an isser to a kohen gadol. Therefore, Rav Akiva will be masking that in such a case, Kiddushin is chal. Continues the Gemara, and we should say concludes the first part of today's shir. V'Rabbanan, and according to Rabbanan, Admuki le v'chayve lav v'nikvi v'chayve asay. Says the Gemara, Hani chavi yasei b'mayniu, ishteyem mitzrayis, shteyem snuais, iachas mitzras v'achas Yisraelis, shtey nashim yam echad binan. So what's going to be the case of achas ahuva v'achas snua? Yibur le'koyin gadol miksev siyena le'koyin, Rav Akiva bal karchach shavke lekra davidachik umuki anavshei. Rav Akiva has no other way of learning. And with that, we really continue with part 2 of today's shir, which is continuing quoting the Mishnah of Chol Mi she'ein aloi alav Kiddushin with someone particular, but there is Kiddushin with others. Then we said the Vlad is like the mother. And the Mishnah explains what's this referring to. This is referring to a regular Yisrael marrying either a Shivcha or a Gaya. So if a Yisrael marries a guy, we know that what happens, unfortunately, the child is the status of the mother. The child is going to be a guy. Says the Gemara, Shivcha Kenainis Minol. And what is the case of Shivcha Kenainis? Amar Avuna, Amar Kra, says the Pasuk, Shulachan Poi Ima Chamar. In a week or two in the Torah, says Avram to Yitzchak before the Akedah, stay there, Shvulachan Poi, stay here, Ima Chamar, with the Chamar. From here we darshin Am, a nation, Hadoime lechamar, that is equated to the Chamar, and that's where we see that there can't be any Kiddushin between one and a Chamar, between a man and a woman from Canaan, as Yishmael was. Ashchan no tavseba Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, okay, so you brought a half of Makar. You brought me the car that the Kiddushin is not typhus. But we continue to Savachesav Mebei is a short Amid and asks the Gemara of Lada Kamaisa Minalan. All you brought me a raya from Amadem Chamar. That what? From there is a raya that the Kiddushin is not typhus. But ask the Gemara, from where do you see that the Vlad has the same status as the mother? Explains the Gemara, you know why? The Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ha'isha v'liyadeha tiyeh that a woman and her offspring should bring to the master. And this is from where they were going to learn that the child of such a union does not go free with the father, rather it stays by the master. And this is where we see that gets the status of the mother, and that's why the child's not going free, even though the master goes free, who's the child's father. Says the Gemara, that's the case of Shivcha. Nachris minalan, where you see the case of Nachris of a Gaita Amar Kra, that the child follows the status of the mother. Amar Kaloi titchatein bam. Says the Gemara, the pasuk says you should not make marriage with them, which implies that there's no way for such a person to be married between a Yid and a Goy. So very good. Ashkan Zotavs about Kiddushin. This is where you see you're not allowed to marry a Goy. There's no Kiddushin Chal. Where do we see that the Vlad of such a union, if it were to have happened, has the status of Kimaisa, like her of the mother? Amar Yechlam, Yishim Shimon Yechai. The Amar Kra says the Torah Ki Yasir is Bincha. He'll turn his son away from me and he'll serve other Avodah Zarah. Habam Yisraelis Kari Bincha. So who comes from Yisraelis is called Bincha. Ve'ein Bincha. Habam ben Avodas Chavim Kari Bincha. But a child from a Gaita is not considered Bincha. Ella Binna, her son. From the fact that the pasuk says that Ki Yasir is a Bincha, Tarshit's the Gemara, that's only in a scenario where it is Bincha, but if it's coming from a Gaita, it's not Bincha, but rather it goes after the mother, Bitcha. And based off of this, Amar Ravina Shema Mina Ben Bincha Ba Min Ha'akum. Says Rav Yochanan, your daughter's son, a grandson from one's daughter, Haba Min Ha'akum, who comes from a Goy, if one's daughter has relations with a Goy, the child that is born from that, Karoi Bincha, is indeed called your son. Why? Because the daughter was Jewish, like we just said. Ravina. So ask the Gemara, is it true that Ravina holds Akum ve'eved abba bas Yisrael avlan mamzer? Nei de kasha loyhave mamzer loyhave psol mikri. So says the Gemara, are you telling me that Ravina holds that an Akum of an Evan Abbas Yisrael that Vlad is a mamzer? Nei de kasha loyhave. I understand according to Ravina the kid is not kosher, but mamzer loyhave is not a mamzer psule mikra. Such a child from an illegal marriage is just going to be called a psol. And we finish off today's shir with what is the status of Kiddushin with a Akum, with a Goy. Ahu b'shiva Goyim ksiv. Says the Gemara, that pasuk where there is no Kiddushin, it's talking about the 7 nations of Canaan. Shar Umais Minolan, from where do we know that there's no Kiddushin at all if someone marries a Goy? Amar Kra Ki Yasir es Bincha. The rabbis call him Mesirim, which comes to include anyone who turns away any of the other nations of the world that one could get involved with. Says the Gemara. El Rabbanan my taima. But according to Rabbanan who do not darshin taima dikra, what's the reason that there's no Kiddushin between a Yisrael, between a Yid and a Goy? After you go, you're going to sleep with her, and what's going to happen? She's become a wife. Originally there was no Kiddushin, only now do we see the case of let's just read the pasuk. In the case excuse me. You remove the clothing of captivity, and she cries over her father's house for many days. Only in this scenario is there going to be a case of the Eshes Yifas Tayar, as Rashi spells out, the case of a woman captured at war that one makes into their spouse. That's going to be the case. Why? Because she's a guy, and only in this case will there be Kiddushin. Kiddushin. Ashcha Daf Zeba Kiddushin. V'lada Kamaisa, and I already see the vlad follows the mother. Amar Krasiana Leish V'yolda Lai. Kolechad Krinim Bay Kisiena Krinim Bay V'yolda Lai. If there's a marriage, it goes after him. Kolechad Lai Krinim Bay Kisiena Lai Krinim Bay V'yolda Lai. And that's the reason why in such a forbidden union, the child is going to take on the status of the mother of the guy. We'll stop over here. I'll pick it up from here the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.